Hey, what's up, guys? It's Menta. Uh, Today we're going to be looking at chords, chord stacks, and how to process them. And this is the track we're going to be working on. Right. I know it's been a while. It's been busy. Um, I'm going to try and be a bit more consistent with these. I know there's not a huge amount of UK hardcore / hard dance tutorials out there. And hopefully I've got something to provide for you guys. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get into it. I don't want to waste your time. So we're going to look at chords today, in particular these chords. A lot of people don't realize, especially when starting out, that chords, any supporting element, are huge for filling out a stack in your drop. A lot of people will try and make a top line melody, i.e. this. And they'll try and keep filling that out, keep adding layers, keep going, oh, it doesn't sound fat enough, it's not full enough sounding. It just doesn't work. If you play this drop without the chord layer, you'll kind of see what I mean. If I A-B it in, you hear how empty that sounds. As soon as you bring in the chord layer, you immediately get that huge, full sounding drop. And chords aren't the only way to do it, they're a big part of it. I actually don't have some more harmonizing / accompanying elements. There's a lot of things I use in my tracks, like pads in the drop that play sort of single note or octave notes apart, harmonizing with the chords. You can add in strings, you can add in choirs, you can create a sample off of a vocal, and you can turn that into a synth as well, resample that. There's lots of things you can do to really fill out your drops. In this case, I'm just using chords and a lead. It sounds relatively full. I mean, for a track I'd release, I'd definitely add more to it, but for the purposes of demonstration, it shows off enough. So the sound choice of the chords are actually very simple. The first one is just Menta chords, which, if you've seen my previous video on lead processing, which stick around to the end, I will be showing you my updated lead processing. It factors in a lot to the chord processing. It's very similar. So you will get a lot of it, but I will show you just the differences between the chord processing that we're going through in this one compared to the lead processing, which is very similar, and compare that to what I was doing before in the previous video, and why I think what I do now is better. So this is actually, as I say, this is Menta chords, which is exact preset I made in the previous video. So if you haven't seen that, go up, I'll stick a card up there. You can go and check that out. It's the main supersaw layer of that lead stack is this Menta chords, and that on its own sounds like this. I'll turn off all the processing so you can kind of hear what the chords just sound like on their own. And that gives you the basis for majority of the chords. I then have another layer, which is actually just an edited preset from Stonebank with our reverb delay disabled, and I think I turned it into poly mode and up the voices because I think it was in mono because it was primarily for leads, to thicken up leads, and I use it to thicken up my chords. Perfectly acceptable to do. Don't be afraid to use presets. Everyone uses them. They make your writing quicker. They make your life easier. There's nothing wrong. I'm not the best at sound design. I know that openly. I'm capable of it, but when I'm writing, I like to just pick stuff and go, you know. I want to be quick. Because a lot of the time, the way you process something means, and the way you layer something means you can't even identify the preset it came from anyway. So as long as you're doing stuff, it's really, there's no problem. I don't understand the dislike towards it at all. So that's that. And this is this layer. It sounds like this. Now, you can hear with this that on its own, it sounds kind of weird. And that's why it's very much a layer supporting the chords that we had above. You can hear there's a lot more like grittiness and roughness that comes from that extra sound layer. So when you pair these together, you get this really, really nice sound. It's another thing that I'm interested in doing because there's not really that much out there to explain it, and that is layering. Not so much, oh, these sounds go together, but more, why do these sounds go together? Why do you pick certain sounds to layer? And if you'd like me to go a bit more in depth about that topic, let me know, comment below, and I'll definitely consider it because I think it's something that needs to be spoken about a bit more, particularly in the hard dance space. So yeah, let me know. So with this one, very similar to the previous lead processing video, chords are done pretty much the same way. You've got some EQ, pretty basic, chopping out some lows, chopping out some highs that are inaudible. Then I have the exact same layout for both chords and leads, as you can see here. This is slightly different to my leads video from before. I will go through the new chords processing here, and then if you stick around to the end, I will quickly go over the lead stack too. So the chords, again, I mean, this is kind of a catch-all. I chop out the lows and highs again, just a catch-all kind of thing. I then process the delay separate to the reverb and separate to the chords. So we have the dry signal being sent to the delay, the reverb, and the final chord bus. The delay gets sent to the final chord bus, the reverb gets sent to the final chord bus, and then you end up with, obviously, the final chord bus. So just putting the pre on, I mean, that's not going to make any difference. I'm just chopping out some more of the sound, so yeah. And that's just so it doesn't interfere too much with the bass. I'm still letting a lot of the low end of the chords through though, because you want that full sound, and as long as your bass is low enough that it doesn't interfere, it's absolutely fine. But be careful with that on how low you go. You want enough low end to bring the body of the chords out, but you don't want too much low end that it's going to mess up your bass. You definitely want that separation there still. Then we've got a delay, which is just a bit of delay 3 with a slight cut of the highs on the feedback, quite a low feedback level, and that sounds like this. Really adds a new dimension to it, but the delay itself is actually quite low in the mix because you don't want it to overpower. At the end of the day, this is a supporting element. The reverb and the delay on the lead stack is going to be where a lot of the space comes from. So the chords do still need that extra dimension. It does need the delay and the reverb, but it can be a lot quieter. And then the reverb. Now this is the one that makes quite a big difference. And the way I do reverb now really makes this glue together a lot more, sound a lot more cohesive. As you can see, I've kind of got it set up here with a peak controller and a limiter. Now, if you've seen my previous video, you'll know that the peak controller is how I used to do reverb. There is nothing wrong with using the peak controller for this, but specifically for me, there was a few things I noticed that I didn't quite like about it. One of those, and the main one being, the peak controller controls, in my case, the mix knob of the reverb. The problem is, when a note plays and you duck the reverb down with the peak controller, you're actually still letting through the dry signal, and that means you're basically doubling up the volume of the dry signal which is already being sent to the master chord bus. The chord reverb ducks, still sending through that dry signal again, and that can cause phasing issues, but mostly it also just doubles up the volume, and that's not ideal. So what I do instead is I now use the limiter in sidechain compression mode, and I push that through after the sidechain. And what you'll see here is the threshold set so that we let a little bit of reverb through while notes are playing, but quite a lot of the reverb's ducked. Let me make this bigger a minute. You'll see quite a lot of the reverb is getting ducked. The purple is showing what the original signal would be. The white is showing you what the signal is actually being let through. And the little blue line is showing you the compressor at work, attack, release. I use quite a lot of high attack so that you get kind of a sweep in of the reverb, so you get this kind of swell. I might be able to show you this. I don't know if you can tell the difference there, but it makes it a little bit smoother of a transition coming in on the compressor. And then you can see every time that the chord stops playing, the reverb swells up to its original volume, which means that you get this huge reverb and huge air and huge sense of space when notes stop playing, and that gives you that presence of the lead without any notes. And that sounds very nice. And most importantly, this is all acting only on the only on the wet sound of the reverb. None of the dry signal will ever get set through. If I turn off the delay and turn off the dry signal, you'll hear just the reverb come through, and you'll hear it's completely wet 100% of the time. Now, what's interesting about the chords specifically is I actually have the limiter on 50% mix. If you push this onto 100% mix, you'll hear the difference. You really only get the swells in that case. Now, because this is a supporting element and I wanted it to have that sort of glue, that sense of space, I limit the mix to 50% so that when the reverb is not swelling and not ducking, it's still letting it through. That's not very explained very well, but you can hear the difference anyway. It's not swelling as much because we're letting through 50% of the wet signal without ducking and swelling it. So you end up with this kind of a hybrid of just pure reverb as well as ducked reverb. And that, for the chords, works. I don't do that on the leads, and I'll come to that afterwards, but that's how I do it on the chords. Now the final bus, if I turn all of this on, you'll hear the difference. You should do it immediately. If I turn off the sidechain, actually, because that'll that's way too noticeable. So how are we doing this? There's a lot of high end coming out. There's a lot of everything coming out. If I mute all these, we go through them one by one. We start with a EQ, and that just takes out a couple of resonances and a little bit of the body from the chords, just to tame it and control it a little bit. I then use LALA, which is an analog obsession compressor, It's free on Analog Obsession's Patreon. I recommend you check it out. It's very handy. And we do some peak reduction here just to get a consistent sound. We're only dropping about -2 on the peak reduction. So it's very subtle, but it does tame those peaks and it makes it less sharp on the transients, which is very good. Then we have Molotok, and Molotok is used a bit more sparingly than it used to, if you've seen my previous video. I now only have Molotok set to a 50% dry mix, which means that Molotok is only actually compressing 50% of the sound. We're letting through 50% of the sound to the next mixer insert. And this gives us this sound. But it still does what Molotok does. It glues it together a bit. It has that color on it, which I really like the sound of. And it also swells the reverb a little bit more. I'm just toning it down a little bit in the new stack because I thought it got a bit too messy before. So I'm taming that. I then use Oxford Inflator on 100% and then just drop the output so that we don't have too much gain. So without Oxford and with. Quite a subtle effect because of the gain staging. It obviously normally would boost the gain as well, but we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that the effects we're adding are actually doing something meaningful and not just making it louder, because we'd always think louder's better. And after Inflator, we've got another EQ, which just shapes the sound a bit. We're just boosting the high end slightly, boosting a little bit around the 1K mark, which just brightens up the sound a bit to taste. And then we've got a kickstart 2 at the end to add some sidechain. Other things in here, I've got a mute, which is used for transitions and build-ups and things. It's just kind of there, left over. And filter for doing filter automation and bits and pieces. Again, in like build-up to drops and things like that. So that is how we process the chords. So going to the leads then. In this case, we have this lead stack. And you can hear how that sounds, and the reverb's huge on that as well. The way this is done now, compared to how it was done before in my previous video, I've separated the reverb and delay out. It used to be done in that order, in one parallel chain with reverb and then delay, both controlled by a peak controller. What I do nowadays is still the same bus before, so a lead group before of all of the lead layers. These days I just have some peak taming and resonances, a little bit of a body cut in this case because this specific lead needed it, then a little bit of shaping of the lead group, and then an OTT which is done to taste. In this case I'm boosting the mids slightly and the highs slightly to really squash the sound and get that kind of crispy UK hardcore sound out of it. Then we have the delay. It's done very similarly to the chords. The difference is with the delay, I will show you the leads with just the delay and the dry signal. So the key difference here is to make things less messy, and arguably I should do this on the chords as well. In fact, even more so, because the chords have a lot more low end. And that is, unfortunately, Fruity Delay does only have one feedback filter, and I use it a lot of the time to low pass and take off the highs a little bit, which means I don't actually lose the low end. So in this case, on the leads, I use an EQ to chop out the lows before we go into the delay on this chain, so that we don't have too much muddiness in the low mids. So you get a cleaner sound overall. And the reverb. Now, in this case, the reverb is similar to, it's in fact identical to the chords. The only difference being that the limiter is on 100% wet mix and not 50. Because we want that swell to be permanent, consistent. Otherwise, it gets a little bit too mushy in the mix. It gets a little bit too muddy, and I don't like it. It doesn't sound as tight. It doesn't sound as clean. And no one wants that. The reverb's pretty much the same as what it was before. I think there's some slight tweaks to the preset, but it's pretty much the same. And then the limiter, in this case, is sweeping slightly different settings to the chords. No, actually I'm lying. It's exactly the same setting as the chords for consistency. The only difference being the threshold and how much reverb you actually want to let through when a note plays. You can adjust that to taste, but you can very much hear exactly how much reverb is being let through there and how much it's sweeping up. Now, when we are deciding on these between the peak controller and the limiter, because peak controller is still a valid method, like I said before, I don't personally use it as much anymore, mainly because the dry signal gets let through when the reverb doesn't, and I don't like doubling up on the sound. But having said that, sometimes it is quite nice when you don't want that reverb swell, particularly in cases when a melody is not like this one. This melody has quite a lot of gaps in it, which means that a swell can actually happen. There are a lot of UK hardcore melodies out there that do not have so many gaps, and in that case, you'll never get the reverb swell. So sidechaining the reverb doesn't make much sense because you're not getting the benefit of it. In which case, using the peak controller is an option because you'll always be letting through the wet signal, which is fine. So it's food for thought. Neither one is right or wrong. That's an explanation as to why I use that limiter over the peak controller, but you can use both. Right, so that is the processing of chords and the updated processing of leads. Hopefully that was helpful to you guys, and yeah, let me know any ideas you have for anything else you'd like me to cover in the future, whether it be track breakdowns of songs I've released, if that's interesting to anyone. I'm looking at potentially doing a tutorial on transitions. That seems to be something that comes up a lot, I see, how to make better transitions between structure, different parts of your arrangement, different parts of the structure of the song, and also just kind of making unique effects off of existing samples you've got in your library, doing things with reversing, understanding that Edison is actually a really powerful sampler. So yeah, let me know what you'd like to see, and I'll leave you with what we made today. Cheers, guys.